All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Doan Brook Restoration Project. My name is Jessica Schutte, and I'm from the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District. I'm the Public Information Specialist. Just some housekeeping items. At tonight's meeting, you're going to get an update on the project, and it is being recorded, and you can go to nursd.org/DoanBrook to see it afterwards. Tomorrow, we're going to be having a in-person public meeting at Shaker Heights Public Library from 11 to 1 and then 5 to 7. If you have any special accommodations for accessibility, please go to nursd.org/accessibility and fill out the survey there for that. So just some background on public engagement that we've had with you all. So we had meetings in August of 2022, December of 2022, and May of 2023. And we do some partner events. We're going to be at Take It to the Lake, the Apple Fest, and the Autumn Fest, and other pop-up events that may come. And then there will be an online survey as well. And then there is in the Zoom Q&A that you can ask questions. You could also go to askus@nursd.org to fill out your question there if you would like it to be in a different way. Right now, I'd like to introduce Matt Sharber. He's our Director of Watershed Programs. And Matt, if you want to take it from there.
Good evening, everyone. We'll be getting started here shortly with the presentation, but I just wanted to welcome everyone again to the Doan Brook Restoration at Horseshoe Lake Park. Just forgive me for a minute, just need to get back to the presentation. There we go. Apologize for the short technical difficulties. Always a challenge when we're doing virtual presentations. But again, we just want to welcome everyone again to the Doan Brook Restoration here near Horseshoe Lake Park. So we're here this evening and we appreciate everyone's attendance for the 30% design presentation. We're excited to deliver this information to you all this evening. And for those that have been following along on the project, I think you're going to find a lot of good content here this evening, as this is our public forum number 4. And as Jessica had mentioned, we've been through a process already of public forums. And if you're just joining us for the first time, you can go again to our website here that we'll show you on this next slide at nursd.org/DoanBrook, where you can find all of our past project updates and past presentation recordings, and even our current frequently asked questions to gather background information on how this process has transpired to this point. And so this evening, we're going to walk through the agenda that you see here. And we're first going to focus on the stream restoration itself that's occurring on Doan Brook, the north and the middle branch of Doan Brook, because stream function first is very important in terms of reestablishing this landscape. I think folks are well aware that we've got a 170-year-old Horseshoe Lake Dam that's deteriorating and needs to be removed from this landscape. And this provides a great opportunity to restore the function of Doan Brook, its stream corridor, access to its floodplain. So we're going to give you a lot of detail tonight in the 30% design review on just how we're going to do that in terms of how we're managing the sediment in the lake bed, the removal of the earthen embankment, which is the dam, and then how we're creating new wetland features and floodplain access for Doan Brook. And all this is going to be in the context of how we sensitively handle the existing landscape, particularly with the tree environment that's within the lake or within the park system there. And then we'll transition into more detail about the park integration, the circulation of the new paths that are proposed, the connectivity between North Park Boulevard and South Park Boulevard, between Cleveland Heights and Shaker Heights, and throughout this expansive 60 acres of landscape. The team will talk more about the landscape landform changes, the typologies that we're proposing, so you'll get some good insight in how the landscape is going to change. and then the potential park amenities that may be brought to bear by the communities involved. And then we'll end with a little bit of discussion about probable construction costs that we have at 30%. And then we'll remind you of these next steps that we have, in particular tomorrow's in-person forum that we have planned. So with that, we'll continue to move forward. And before we do, I just wanted to revisit the project schedule with everyone. So if you recall, we were in the pre-design phase for about a year plus. And now we've transitioned into detailed design. And this evening, we'll deliver the 30% design plans to you all to consider. We still have much more to go in terms of design effort. We're moving into the 60% design stage. There'll be a 90%, and then we'll have a final plan set. And we'll have additional public forums and one final public update coming in the future before we move into the public bidding process and on into construction in the early part of 2026. And so now I just want to introduce the consultant team that's working in close concert with the district team and the teams at Shaker Heights and Cleveland Heights who are going to walk us through the remainder of the presentation. So you may recall that our external consultants are the Stimson Group, who are handling the landscape architecture and stakeholder engagement. And Matt Ling is our project manager, and he'll be delivering a lot of content this evening with Glenn Valentine, who is our landscape integration leader. So Glenn will cover our landscape integration and park amenities portions of the presentation today. We also have Dr. Roy Larrick participating as a key advisor on our archaeology and natural history for the site. And then the teams at AECOM handling our civil engineering, specifically the dam removal and sediment management, as well as the GPD group and EnviroScience teams handling our stream and ecological restoration. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Matt to begin to walk us through the existing conditions of the 30% design.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us as we review this next round of updates on our Doan Brook Restoration project. As Matt mentioned to you, I'm going to walk you through a series of diagrams that illustrate how we got to where we are today, and talk quite a bit about our park as it functions from a hydrological standpoint. I'll show you a series of diagrams and plan views and perspectives that illustrate how the streams are supposed to function as they go through the Doan Brook corridor. And then I'm going to hand it over to Glenn Valentine to talk to you a little bit more about our overall park amenities that we are planning for the project as part of the city's scope of work. On the screen here, you can see the existing conditions showing the north branch and the middle branch of Doan Brook carving their way through the impoundment area, which is the area of the old lake bed. There's about 180 to 190,000 cubic yards of sediment within that impoundment area that we have to move out of the way to be able to enable the stream restoration of both the north and middle branches. On the next slide here is our overall project tree inventory. This is new information to us that we received early on in the 30% design process. And this has been an invaluable tool for us to take all of this data and start to manipulate our design to maximize saving of the healthy mature trees, and also start to identify locations of invasive and dead trees on the project. This little pie chart on the bottom left of the screen identifies a series of tree species that are deployed throughout the park. A couple of the highlighted ones on the bottom right of your screen are identified there as well. Overall, about 3,000 trees were inventoried as part of this project. And as you see in the next couple of slides, we've been able to take all of that great data that has genus, species, size, and general condition, and start to break that down to help us make some design decisions along the way. This slide here identifies the locations of all the invasive or dead trees. You can see in those kind of two different tones of red. The dead trees are about 8% of all trees on the site, and the invasive trees are about 12% of all the trees on site. And you can see they're located mostly around the edges of the old lake and in the downstream area where the floodplain is wide open and there's a large low-lying area in the downstream section of the park. Again, on the bottom right, you can see a series of some of the most common invasive species that we've encountered throughout the park. We were also to be able to identify with the tree inventory data what we're calling legacy trees. Legacy trees account for just under 10% of all trees in the park. And the way that we've defined legacy trees is trees of good genus or good species that are also larger than 36-inch diameter. So these are the really massive, majestic trees on the site. And we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to protect these trees during and after construction. And so understanding the tree inventory and where all the important trees are, we've taken a pass at realigning the stream alignments to make sure that we're protecting as many of those legacy trees as possible, but also, in a sense, aiming at some of the invasive trees to make sure we can wipe out those invasive tree clusters as we're restoring the streams throughout the impoundment area. To enable that stream restoration process in the alignment that you see here highlighted in blue, there is a pretty vast area of earthwork that needs to be done to enable the stream restoration process. So in this area highlighted in red, this is effectively the limit of regrading that has to happen on the project. The regrading has to happen on the project because, as I mentioned earlier, there's hundreds of thousands of cubic yards of sediment in the old lake bed. And then there's also the earthen embankment of the old dam that has to be partially removed to allow the stream to pass through it down towards Lee Road. And so you can see this is a pretty vast area and it's going to require quite a bit of manipulation. It's also going to require a series of tree removals. And so if you can remember back to the slide where we showed the invasive or dead trees, most of those were along the edges of the old lake and in that downstream area. And so you can see our regrading opportunity here is to take advantage of removing a lot of that invasive plant material as part of the regrading efforts and try to manipulate and get rid of that seed bank of invasive seed and roots all along those edges of the old lake. That will then allow us to take all of that sediment that was highlighted, if I go back for a second, in that red zone and scoop it up and relocate it on site to these areas now highlighted in orange. That will allow us to create a series of new landforms in the park that create high points in the park that'll give park users great views down into the floodplain in all directions. But it'll also be an opportunity for us to create vertical circulation from the upland boulevards down and across the floodplain and back up the other side to reconnect the two communities together. So these landforms are going to be a mixture of soil that is relocated on the site, sediment that has been amended and replaced as a structural fill to enable the park circulation and park amenities that you'll see in a little bit. So this highlights exactly what I was just talking about. We're calling this slide floodplain access, and that has two meanings, really. It's showing that areas highlighted here in blue are providing access to the floodplain for the stream. So the stream is going to come up out of its banks and access this proposed floodplain highlighted here in the light blue. But the floodplain access also applies to park users, and these orange landforms that we've just talked about are our opportunity to tip those plains up and down to provide circulation in an accessible way from the upland areas down into the floodplain, across these boardwalks and bridges, and then back up the other side. So the circulation you can see here highlighted in white is exactly that circulation using these landforms to create the access that we think will be necessary for a successful park. That allowed us then to kind of create a hierarchy of potential park circulation throughout the park using a series of colored lines, simply identifying primary circulation, secondary circulation, and tertiary circulation. And all that really means is we want to create a variety of different opportunities for park users to access the park and to use the park in a variety of different ways to get different experiences. So the primary circulation and the secondary circulation, as it stands right now, will all be paved paths throughout the park, whereas the tertiary circulation will include things like lawn paths and dirt trails, similar to some of the trails that are used today inside the park. And so that brings us to our landscape integration plan, which highlights all of those elements of stream function that we just talked about. But it also starts to illustrate how we've overlaid the circulation system in a whole range of park amenities on top of all of that regraded earth on the project. We're going to walk you through a little bit more about the park amenities, but before we do, we want to reiterate the point about how important stream function and park hydrology is to the project. And so we're going to dive into that now, and I'll call your attention to the north and middle branches of Doan Brook as they come through the park in confluence right in the middle of the park and then continue on downstream to Lee Road. You can see that generally the width of that stream is about 20 feet wide and is fairly continuous all the way down from Park Drive to Lee Road. But as we start to look at what happens during a typical summer rain shower, you can see that the stream corridor gets a little bit wider and the stream comes up out of its banks and starts to spread out a little bit. You can also see a whole series of squiggly lines along the edges of the park. Those are a series of constructed wetlands that we'll talk more about in just a minute, but they also take on water from the adjacent neighborhoods, and I'll show you that in just a second. So if I toggle back and forth here for a second, you can see that even in a small summer rain shower, which is anything less than an inch of rain in a 24-hour period, really starts to change the way the stream looks, even if after a small rain event. And when we get larger rain events, the changes are much more dynamic. And you'll see that here as I go forward to what we're calling a one-year storm event. A one-year storm event is just under 2 inches of rain in a 24-hour period. And what you can see here, again, if I toggle back and forth between a typical summer rain shower and a one-year storm, is a much broader stream corridor where that stream is accessed in much more of the floodplain. And this is all by design. This is intentionally designed to allow that water to, in the stream to come out of its banks and access this vast floodplain, to slow that water down and store that water as it's slowly draining westward under Lee Road and out towards Lake Erie. Again, on the edges, you can see a series of wetlands that are starting to get hydrated by storm events as well. As we jump ahead to the 10-year storm, again, you could see the footprint of the floodplain swelling with more water. That water is moving nice and slow and is as shallow as possible. Again, by design to make sure that we're slowing this water down as it's passing through the park site. And then even in a 100-year storm event, which is the biggest storm event that we're designing for, you can see the entire floodplain has been submerged now, but the major park circulation, the arteries of circulation through the park are still accessible, and our proposed boardwalks and bridges are still above the water level. Again, that's by design to ensure that the park can be used even during a major storm event like a 100-year storm. And so to put that into perspective, here you can see a diagram of some of the major potential park circulation in the site. This is a bird's eye view, kind of hovering over Lee Road, looking east. You can see the Beaumont School off to the left there and South Park Boulevard off to the right. Here you can see 3 of the main circulation spines through the park. The first one is the shared use path. That's the shared pedestrian and bicycle pathway that cuts diagonally right through the park. There's also the mid-block crossing. The mid-block crossing is the footprint of the old sidewalk that took you across the dam between North and South Park Boulevard. That will be reconstructed, and a major piece of it, right where it says mid-park crossing there, will be a pedestrian bridge that continues to make that connection across the new stream corridor between North Park and South Park Boulevard. And then in the background, you can see what we're calling the Attleboro-Shelburne Trail. The Attleboro-Shelburne Trail is a physical connection between the terminus of Attleboro Road along South Park down into the floodplain, across the floodplain, and back up to Shelburne Road on the Cleveland Heights side of the project. What's exciting about this circulation network, as I jump ahead, is that this circulation network will be open to the public even during major storm events, as you can see here. These trails are designed to stay high and dry and allow the floodwater from the stream to pass right underneath them as it continues its way out to Lake Erie. You could also see on the right-hand side of the shared use path a series of lobed areas that are also taking on stormwater. That's one of our many constructed wetlands in the project, and we're going to talk about those here now. So a major component of our park hydrology, which is separated almost entirely from the stream system, is a series of wetland filters that we've been designing to intercept stormwater coming from the adjacent neighborhoods and filter that stormwater before it ultimately delivers filtered water back into the Doan Brook corridor. There's 4 major wetland systems that are currently being designed. Wetland 1, on the center bottom of the slide here, has a drainage area of nearly 90 acres of Shaker Heights that continues all the way south to Woodland Road and all the way east to Eaton Road. All that stormwater that's being collected from the streets of that part of the neighborhood currently outlet in pipes or from pipes directly into the middle branch of Doan Brook today. We're going to intercept that water as it's coming into the park site and put it into this 3-lobed wetland system that you can see there. As you look a little bit further to the west along South Park Boulevard, there's Wetland 2 that has almost a 10-acre drainage area. And you can see the entire footprint of that drainage area highlighted here, mostly the properties along South Park Boulevard, just to the west of Attleboro Road. All of that stormwater coming from that land and that part of South Park Boulevard will be captured into a small wetland system highlighted there in orange on the far west side of the site, and let that water get filtered before it makes its way back into Doan Brook. And then on the north side of the project in Cleveland Heights, there's 2 more wetland systems, Wetland 3 and Wetland 4. And those are just over 10 acres of drainage area draining from sections of North Park Boulevard in the Beaumont School back down into Doan Brook that will be intercepted into those smaller wetland systems along the north side. So to give you a sense of what this might look like in the park, we're going to look at Wetland 1, that series of 3 lobes of wetlands along South Park Boulevard. You can see that here on the screen now. And you can also see the shared use path dividing Wetland 1 from the middle branch of Doan Brook, which is that line there that you can see coming through. This has been designed as an entirely separate water system from the Doan Brook system, and that's intentional because we want to take all the stormwater coming off the streets and run that through this wetland system to filter that water out before we ultimately bring it back to Doan Brook. So we're going to look at those same storm events that we just looked at earlier in plan view, and we're going to see how that starts to hydrate these wetlands. So during a typical summer rain shower, like I mentioned earlier, it's about 1 inch of rain in a 24-hour period. You can see the wetland starts to get hydrated in this long swale here. And that swale normally would be dry, but after a rain event, the water starts to flow through this wetland system and deliver water into all the lobes of the wetland. As we jump ahead to the 1-year storm event, you can see some of the low areas of the wetlands start to get inundated with small pools and pockets of water. And then you can see in a larger 10-year storm event, those little pockets of water start to grow into these big oblong pools, which are taking that water and really letting that water sit there and get filtered before it starts to recede back into that swale and then ultimately out into Doan Brook. And then in the 100-year storm event, you can see the entire wetland system is completely inundated, and that water is being detained and filtered before it's going through a controlled outlet underneath that shared use path back into Doan Brook. This is allowing the storm water coming through the Doan Brook system to pass through the culvert under Lee Road and down towards the nature center and beyond before we start to outlet the water from the wetland system back into Doan Brook. And so as we come back to the landscape integration plan, you can see how we've designed the park to function hydrologically as our primary objective, but also use the stream restoration process and the landform creation to set the table for a whole lot of other things, including circulation and park amenities. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Glenn Valentine, to walk you through a little bit more of the different types of landscapes that you'll be able to observe and encounter in the park through our circulation network. And then Glenn will take you on a little tour of all of the park amenities that we've designed into the project to date.
Thanks, Matt, for that explanation of hydrology and circulation in the park and how we've manipulated all of that landform and that sediment to make those two systems function. There's another thing that all of that sediment is going to allow us to do in this park, and that's to create a series of very distinct habitats throughout the entire landscape, starting at the lowest point with the restored stream corridor itself, which is shown in the pink area here, and then adjacent to that, constructed wetlands as you come up to a slightly higher elevation in the blue-green color on either side. And then flowing up from that, we're designing a series of meadows which transition from the stream floodplain and stream valley to the parklands along each side of the parkway. That whole yellow area you see are those sloping meadows of the hillsides. And then up at the top, we're designing new open parklands along the north and south sides of the park using large collections of native species, both in canopy trees, shrubs, and ground covers. And in some areas along South Park in particular, we're thinking of using meadows along that edge too to reduce the amount of mowing that's needed in that landscape. We're going to take a look at each one of these environments in turn as we kind of tour through the park, and we'll look at the amenities as well. But to start out, we're going to look at the restored stream corridor itself. Here's a view from down along the edge of the restored Doan Brook, along the central spine path that runs from east to west through almost the entire length of the park. It's about 10 feet wide, and here you can see that new path being used by strollers, joggers, bikers. It's really designed to accommodate all of those different activities through the middle of the park and provides a way for most people to experience the restored water system along almost its entire length as you walk or stroll or go along it in any manner that you choose. You can see in the background that we're near the middle of the park because you can see the new bridge that forms the mid-park crossing for the restored space. In the upper right-hand corner of this image, you can see a little key plan with a red arrow, and that indicates where the viewer is standing to get this particular perspective view in the park. Now we're going to continue our tour through the restored stream corridor. We've designed a series of different ways for people to interact with the restored brook itself. This is one of the things we heard most loudly in our public engagements throughout the process of designing this park, that people wanted to get down to the level of the water and really engage with the restored brook. Here you can see the outside meander of a portion of the Doan Brook, where it's this kind of armoring, these boulders along that edge, has been manipulated to create a series of informal steps to allow people to get down from the level of the adjacent pathways down to the level of the water itself. This particular spot you can see on the key plan is along the north branch, and it's right next to the area of nature play, which we'll get into later in this presentation. and it allows parents and kids to get down to the level of the water. We've also designed other ways for people to interact with the brook. You can see in the foreground of this image a child walking across an informal kind of bridge made out of stepping stones or boulders that are going to cross the brook and create the beginning of one of the many riffles throughout the length of the restored Doan Brook. And on the inside meander, you can see a shelf of gravel that is accessible by this series of stepping stones. It allows for another way of exploring along the length of the waterway itself. Now we're at the Mid-Park crossing at the new bridge, and you can see here we've designed it to be as light and airy and open as possible to facilitate views to the east and to the west, but also down into the water itself. This point in the restored brook is going to be really the most active part of the water, where it's going over the steepest grade. So you're going to see riffles and small cascades throughout this portion of the restored brook. And we really want people to look down on it and be excited from the bridge and see the activity and the dynamic qualities of the water at this point. We've also kept the deck and the supports as open as possible because we really want to encourage views from the adjacent pathways and all of the open areas along the restored river looking east and west. The other thing that I want to talk about here is the element of the planting itself and how it's going to change over time. As Matt mentioned, the hydrology of the park is very dynamic, and many of the spaces will change with each storm that comes through the created wetlands and through the floodplain of the restored Doan Brook. But the planting is also just as dynamic and is going to change and evolve through the seasons and through the years. Here, this first slide here is labeled as year 1 through 5. And in the next couple of slides, we've added the element of time into these views. You can see here in this view that most of the landscape is herbaceous, grasses and perennials, and the shrubs are quite low. They've just gone in as small whips or other kind of plantings throughout the restored floodplain area. You can see some small trees in the background just starting to come up, and you get a sense of how open this landscape will be when it's initially planted. But that's going to change with time. Here we've gone fast forward into the future 20 years, and you can see that the shrub layer has grown up to about 10 or 12 feet high, and that will be its mature height. It will be quite dense at this stage in the evolution of the park and rich, creating a lot of habitats for birds and other animals along the length of the corridor. You can also see pioneer tree species jumping up here. Those would be trembling aspen, they'd be cottonwoods, willows, birches, all kind of fast-growing pioneer trees. And they'll reach up to a height of about 35 feet by this time in the evolution of this landscape and really transform the experience from the bridge and from the ground and of the whole feeling of the restored Doan Brook. You can see it transforming towards more of a woodland character as opposed to an open kind of marshland. And we're going to jump forward again. Here you see what this portion of the park might look like 40 years in the future. You can see how much it's transformed here. The canopy trees here have reached up above those pioneer species and closed a canopy over the stream corridor itself. That will create a new level of shade and will outcompete many of those pioneer species, those fast-growing trees and those initial sun-loving shrub communities will diminish. Some will go away completely, and you'll have a very transformed ground plane of native perennials and ferns, as you see here in this image, and the open kind of views that you have from the ground plane will be restored in a way, but in a very new kind of environment below the canopy of trees. You can see here the hardwood trees have reached up into the sky. These are what we imagine might be shagbark hickory on the left or sycamores on the right. And you can see the experience from the bridge. This is the same view, just transformed by time, where you have these open long views to the east and the west. Now you're still going to have views down into the stream valley, but your experience is going to be completely transformed into one where walking on this bridge will be like walking on a canopy walk through the tops of these trees. Now we're going to take a look at that circulation system that Matt was mentioning earlier and describing the system throughout the park, and look at the gateways as they meet the adjacent communities along both the north side and the south side of the park. As Matt mentioned, there's comprehensive circulation through the park that is designed to function even in the largest storm events. These pink areas, these pink dots around the perimeter, are the potential gateways where those circulation systems integrate with the adjacent communities. And each one of them has been designed with a kind of suite of amenities, including benches and signage, trash receptacles, bike racks, to really be as welcoming and inviting as they can be to all the communities surrounding the restored brook and the new park space. We're going to look at a couple of these gateways now. Next. Here's the transformation of the existing entry to Horseshoe Lake Park. And here we've envisioned the native planting stretching out, reaching out around this existing space, really enveloping people coming to the park and creating a very clear separation between pedestrian and vehicular environments. You can see a new plaza formed in the middle center of this slide. That kind of those brown pavers there will have a low mountable curb to make it very clear where the cars stop and where the pedestrian strolling experience begins through the existing Horseshoe Lake Park. Next. And here's a more typical kind of gateway that you're going to experience around the perimeter of the park. This is at the intersection of Attleboro and South Park Boulevard. You can see that little red arrow on the bottom part of the key plan. Here you see some of those key elements. You see bike racks, you see trash receptacles, you see these two little piers, these entry piers where we're going to have signage about the history and identity of the park, and a series of benches throughout the space. And the one thing about each one of these gateways that's really key is you're going to open up vistas into the park, encouraging people to come in and explore the center of the park, which has never been open to them before. And we're kind of envisioning these as a little like mini parks for informal gatherings and play for all of the communities around the Doan Brook Park. Next, we're going to take a look at the integration, the potential park amenities. We're going to take a tour of these amenities, starting from the east and moving to the west. And these are the amenities that really came to the fore in our previous public engagement activities, where there was a kind of voting and design exercise to decide which of these were most important to the design of the park. We're going to start with the Shelburne Gateway Overlook. This is located at the highest point in the park, and it's a new overlook built on one of these promontories that Matt was talking about, with the sediment stored here that gives you long views along the North Branch looking to the east. And in the distance, you'll be able to see nature play from this location. The low seat walls here are related to the historic masonry walls that exist right now in Horseshoe Lake Park. And here we envision kind of hillside, informal hillside seating, kind of outdoor amphitheater that can be used for gatherings and maybe even impromptu community performances at this location. Next. And at the center of the park, this is along the North Branch, looking at that little red arrow for orientation. This is an overview of the nature play, which is one of the largest amenities in the restored park. You can see here that it's divided into three distinct sections or areas of play. On the far left-hand side here will be an area for swings that are enclosed by these planted mounds. And then in the middle of nature play will be an area with climbing structures. And then further to the east or to the right-hand side, there'll be an area for slides set into the hillside. You can also see here how the North Branch of the Doan Brook intersects this nature play area. As I discussed earlier, we really want this to be a place for engagement with the restored brook. And we see these two places where the meanders touch nature play as a critical part of the nature play experience in the park. Here we are zooming in. You can see a little more detail of the nature play design area. You can see those mounds that I was talking about in the last slide on the right-hand side. They'll be heavily planted and really create a separation of the distinct areas within nature play. This is the central area, and you can see the kind of climbing structures we're envisioning made from all natural materials on the right-hand side of this image. And on the left-hand side, you can see the area now known as the beach has been transformed into an area for sand play, really for the youngest kids and visitors to this part of the park. Next. And this is zooming into the far eastern end of nature play. This is the slide area. Here you get a sense of those slides on the right-hand side. There's 3 of them, each of them set into the hillside with boulders along the edge of them that act as kind of a climbing scramble for kids going up to the top of the slide. So that activity is almost as much fun as sliding down into the space. And you can see how those planted mounds really envelop the space and contain and create a individual kind of outdoor room for the different kind of activities and play going on in this area. The tree on the left is actually a tremendous white oak that fell down in a storm last year, which we're envisioning repurposing into an informal climbing structure for this part of the park. Next. And here, moving to along the area along South Park Boulevard, this is an image of one of those sloping meadow hillsides that I mentioned. And this is the area surrounding one of those, the constructed wetland that's going to flood and change with each kind of storm event. We envision this as a kind of meandering, strolling path area on this hillside with lots of benches placed throughout it. We really want people to be able to engage with this new kind of landscape, this meadow landscape, and experience it as it changes through the seasons. It'll be very dynamic and different from spring to summer to fall, and even in the winter, we envision it being very beautiful. And here you see the pollinator garden in the center of the image with those flowers in bloom. This is going to run along the central path of this sloping meadow hillside area. And in the background there, in the center of the screen, you can see an arbor up on the hillside. That's an overlook arbor. And we're going to take a look at that in just a second. So here's that arbor. Now you're up on the landform that was the former dam, kind of close to the center, right before the bridge. You can get an idea of where that is from that red arrow on the key plan up above. This is looking back over that constructed wetland from above. And you can see that we've created a very welcoming and pleasant place for people to sit and watch that space change with different storm events and with the season. And also really to encourage not only views looking to the east into the constructed wetland, but to the west as well with that seat wall in the front. And this is the launching point for the Shaker Interpretive Trail, which will lead to the western half of the site as well. Now going down below that overlook arbor and pavilion up on the landform, this is below the masonry of the historic stilling pool, which you can see in the center right kind of part of this image. This is a sensory garden, and we envision this area being a series of meandering pathways, creating a series of kind of outdoor rooms that are designed to use native plants to heighten people's senses and experiences of nature. We envision some spaces here as rooms that may be filled with, or outdoor garden spaces that are surrounded by trembling aspens and would be filled by the sound of the fluttering leaves in that space. Or other rooms in this sensory garden may be surrounded by groves of native azaleas, which have wonderful scent in the spring. And others really we want to be more tactile, and they may be planted very closely with shagbark, hickory, and sycamore, where you get the tactile experience of actually touching the unique bark of those trees as you pass through that room or outdoor space. And now we're moving further west along North Park Boulevard. This is right in front of the Beaumont School. This is the area that we're calling the outdoor classroom. And it's really divided into two different kinds of spaces, or two small spaces that are interrelated. The first one is a kind of council ring, and there we envision teaching. It's kind of an introduction to forest restoration, and we envision classes there coming out and learning about how the process of forest restoration works, both on the ground plane, the shrub level, the understory, and the canopy trees, and really show that process happening in that initial kind of council ring. And down the hill a little bit further, we have a kind of outdoor amphitheater type seating area, which overlooks one of the largest wetland areas in the park and is set below these majestic legacy trees on the right-hand side, and really encourages students to see this wetland, but also to go out and explore the western half of this park, which is really the most wild part of the park, on a series of informal pathways and trails, which will tie into this outdoor classroom. Next. And finally, getting all the way to the western end of the park, right at the edge of Lee Road, we have the Shaker Interpretive Site. And here you can see two rectangles outlined by low seat walls. Thanks, Jen. And those are the foundation locations of the original Shaker woolen mill on the left-hand side and blacksmith shop that was directly on Lee Road. And we're going to reuse the historic masonry from parts of the dam that are being removed to build these foundations and mark these historic structures. And along with interpretive signage, we're going to plant these areas with trees and other plants that were here before the area was industrialized and transformed by that settlement, and explain about how that ecology has changed. And then there's also a mill race and water running along here. As some of you may have experienced it, it's still, the old mill race sometimes captures water. We're going to transform that into a linear rain garden that will spill down the hillside through a series of weirs in the same location where the old mill used to have water coming down the hillside to power the works of the woolen mill. Now I'm going to pass it back to Matt. Hopefully a good reception here for you to talk a little bit about costs, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. I hope the renderings have given everyone a good sense of the dramatic transformation that we're planning for the park space. And with that, we just want to give you some insight into the costs, which are important to understand as well for this transformation of the park. So with this slide that you see before you, these are the district costs incorporated into the project. And so if you look at the table, we've got broken the costs up into different bid item groups, just lump them together. And the second column that you see is the pre-design costs. Those were the costs that we had at pre-design. And you can see the total at the bottom was about $28.5 million. And now that we've gone through the pre-design process and into this first stage of detailed design and gotten to the 30% design, we're able to refine those costs. And you can see that those costs for the district costs have gone up about $4 million. And really, if you look at row 2, the earthwork row, that's where a lot of the costs will be borne on the project. It's a 60-acre space. The district is going to touch about 26, 27 acres of that with earthwork. And so that's going to be a lot of the cost. And you can see our costs had increased there. And so we'll continue to refine these costs as we look to deploy different strategies for the lake bed sediments and how we manage and move those sediments around the site to create those different landforms that Glenn and Matt had described, and hopefully reduce our need to import different soils and to export some of those lake bed sediments off-site. So we'll continue to refine that as we move forward in the project. And so the next slide will show us in terms of opinion of probable cost for the potential city participation costs in terms of the amenities. And you can see here, it's a little bit different story. Again, the pre-design in column 2 was the cost at $8.5 million. And through refinement to the 30% design, that those costs have actually gone down about $1 million or plus to $7.4 million. Again, the earthwork row 2 is a significant cost, as well as the roadways and trails. As you can imagine, we're potentially implementing a far greater amount of trails within this landscape transformation. And then those amenities that Glenn had just described through the renderings also carry a significant cost. So again, we'll continue to look at these amenities and cost components, refine those, and continue to hopefully be able to drive down costs as we move to the 60, 90, and 100% design stages. So just gives you a sense of where we're at in terms of costs. And so I think the next slide will give you an idea of what we've been talking about in terms of the breadth and scale of earthwork and really this transformation of the park space, knowing that the active park space now is about 6 acres. The total footprint of Horseshoe Lake Park is roughly 60 acres. The graphic that you see on the left, the area in that rusty red color, shows you the expanse of the earthwork that will be under the district's limits of work. And when it's all said and done, there'll be about 26 to 27 acres of corridor, Doan Brook corridor, floodplain, riparian area that the district will maintain and operate into the future. So you can see that $32 million cost there. The graphic to the right illustrates the areas that the city's limits of work. So much smaller, but still pretty significant. And that's where that $7.4 million worth of earthwork and landscape integration in terms of the trail network for circulation, human circulation, as well as those park amenities that are under consideration by both cities to eventually implement into the park landscape. And so lastly, we just wanted to remind you of the forum tomorrow on Tuesday, our public forum number 2 at the Shaker Heights Public Library. Registration is not required, and we have 2 sessions. So hopefully, if you have more questions and you want to engage in person, we'll have a whole host of sewer district folks, as well as our consultant team available to answer those questions. So our first session starts at 11 a.m. in the morning and runs till about 1 p.m. or so. And then our evening session will be 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. At the Shaker Heights Public Library. And then we'll be back with you all again in the spring of 2025 to deliver our public forum number 5 as we move closer to our 60% design in the fall, and then refine that to give you that more complete update in the spring of 2025. So again, I just want to apologize for our technical difficulties. Always somewhat of a risk when we hold these virtually that we might not always have the best internet connection. So hopefully you were able to hang with us and gather the information. Again, this is recorded, and we'll have this presentation up in a day or so. And then certainly we have our in-person meetings tomorrow. So we can certainly answer more questions. But I think now we'll turn it back to Jessica. And if you have, Jessica, if you have some questions, or Jen, that you want to have us answer for the presentation, we can do that.
Great, thanks, Matt. And yeah, as Matt said, we have this recorded, and you could also get the slides available there at www.nursd/doanbrook.org. So please go there. We have some questions in the chat. Trying to see if there's anything that we haven't answered. And if you have further questions after today, you could do the Ask Us website as well. I think we have a few that we're getting to right now, but other than that, I think we're good. Yeah, I think we're good, Matt.
Okay, well, if we don't have any questions we want to answer?
Oh, wait, I'm sorry, there's one. So let's see, we have. All right, well, thank you for your presentation. We had many thoughtful amenities that have to be included in design, so I appreciate that. And then the projects, we have another meeting coming up. And then, Matt, can you pull up the timeline slide? We have a couple questions as far as project completion and where we're at. If you could pull that one up, Matt, that would be helpful to answer some of these questions.
Yep, we can certainly pull that slide up and show
Okay.
our project schedule again.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Thank you.
And so I'm gathering the questions about when we'll see the project under construction. And
When is the project expected to be completed? So maybe if you could just run through that, Matt, that would be helpful.
Sure. So we expect to be under construction in the beginning of 2026. This will likely be a 2-year construction window. It's always a challenge doing in-stream or water work. So the weather will play an important role in how successful we are in moving construction forward with the seasonalities in Northeast Ohio. But again, we hope to have the project mainly completed by the end of 2027. You're going to see a lot of earthwork happening in 2026 through 27. And then once we get everything planted, the project will be fresh. And then we'll have to nurture it along through that early establishment period. But hopefully, as our renderings show, once we get establishment established with that vegetation, it should flourish and grow, and then you'll see the progress that we have in the years to come with the transformation of the space.
Okay, thanks, Matt. We have a couple more questions that came in regarding we have a question here that says, who will be responsible for long-term stewardship of the area, continual removal of invasives, et cetera? And then also kind of going into that is there going to be any dense areas of planting containing shrubs, understory trees, et cetera?
So great questions. Maintenance and long-term stewardship is certainly on the forefront of our minds as we design this project. As I mentioned before, there's about 27 acres of floodplain, riparian corridor, those areas closest to the stream that the sewer district will be maintaining into the future as part of our regional stormwater management program, which will include invasive species management. We know that there's a tremendous amount of invasive species already within the park space. We're devising different strategies to address that and deploy measures that we might actually deploy early on before the project starts. So we're still in discussions about that, but we know that as the project progresses, we'll be able to address a lot of those invasive species, and then the work will continue once the project construction is complete to ensure that the investment that we're making in all the new native species is not lost or overtaken by invasives. So I think we're well positioned to do that.
Thanks, Matt. Another question was regarding there being a lot of paved roadways. Would you consider cutting back on some of those?
So I think we've tried to be very strategic about our circulation throughout the park space, providing access through the space, not only for the enjoyment of the entirety of the space, but also for maintenance. So again, we're at the 30% design. Both cities are continuing to review the design in our direction. And so we'll continue to listen carefully to the amount of trail network that we feel and the cities feel is appropriate. So there may be some adjustments in the future. And I didn't answer the question about the plantings in terms of density. There'll definitely be areas of dense plantings. We have a lot of different landscape forms that you can see here in this slide. So there'll certainly be some areas of dense plantings, and there'll be areas of more open plantings. But the site's really being designed to evolve over time, and that's what we hope to show with the renderings of the 5-year, the 20-year, and then the 40-year in terms of the vegetation growth. So as the site matures, it will transform. Some areas will transform from initially being just shrubby growth areas to more mature trees, and then full tree canopy, certainly within the corridor of the north branch, the middle branch, and then the main stem as it moves down towards Lee Road. So that's our goal, is to get to that overarching canopy, tree canopy. So that we'll have different planting areas for certain.
Thanks, Matt. Could you discuss the tree removal again, please? Especially the shagbark hickory is tolerant of wet sites. Could you kind of explain that for one of the questions that came in?
Yeah, so the tree, and maybe I'll let Glenn chime in here too, but I think we've been advantageous in terms of understanding the trees that exist on site and the amount of invasives. So I think some of our graphics illustrate that we'll be able to remove a lot of the invasive species through the earthwork that will be required to be done. And so, the question about shagbark hickory is really tolerant of upland environments, and there are hickories throughout the site. So we want to make sure that we can protect those hickories and then introduce new planting areas for additional hickories throughout the site where it's appropriate.
Yeah, I can add in, Matt, that's really they're much more dominant in the western half of the site. You'll see that's where the hickories are really concentrated, and it's a very distinctive tree within the park. And it's we want to kind of play up the distinction between the eastern and the western half of the park. So we're going to try and supplement those communities of hickories, particularly on the western half of the site.
Great, thank you, guys. Is there any place that's an easier way to cross from South Park to the North Park where the dam was?
Well, based on our design work, and there's a lot of engineering, hydraulics, hydrology understanding that went into the work in terms of understanding the velocities of the north branch and the middle branch, the shear stresses that they bring through the corridor. So we want to make sure that we create a stable stream corridor. That's first and foremost in terms of managing the regional stormwater system throughout the park space. So the earthen embankment, which is the dam today, is the most ideal location that we determine to confluence both the north branch and middle branch. Slightly repositioned, but that allows us to take advantage to move the downstream portion, the main stem of Doan Brook, back into its historic channel, which should be a more stable channel for Doan Brook into the future. So it also replaces what has been the traditional connectivity between Cleveland Heights and Shaker Heights in terms of the North Park Boulevard and South Park Boulevard connection.
Thanks, Matt. Next question is kind of twofold. So how much grassy area will require mowing? And would a structure for shade be made someplace rather than the open structures that folks have seen in the pictures today?
I can answer some of that, Matt, and you can chime in. The structure that is going to be near the bridge at the Mid-Park crossing, that structure there is really going to be designed for shade. And even though it looks somewhat open in the renderings right now, it's under transformation as we continue to design it, and it will very much be designed for shade in that particular location. In other areas, we're really counting on the planting of canopy trees as providing most of the shade, as in a lot of park spaces that you see. So we can assure you that particular structure is going to provide a shady spot to overlook the park. And we're thinking carefully about how the tree plantings are going to provide shade in other areas, particularly in gathering areas throughout the park.
Thanks, Glenn.
And,
go ahead.
hang on,
Sure.
Jessica,
Yeah, go ahead.
just wanted to follow up with Glenn. Glenn, the question about the lawn areas. Do you recall acreages on the lawn footprint?
I recall that we actually have reduced the amount of lawn area that is going to be maintained by mowing now. And it's largely through the introduction of all of that yellow area as meadow is transition area. And the areas that were before mowed, particularly along South Park Boulevard, you can see some of that meadow actually extends along that edge in long kind of islands of meadow. So we're reducing the amount of lawn overall, and particularly along that edge, wherever we have a large enough area. So it's, from a maintenance standpoint, it's practical to provide meadow community. We're really going to take advantage of that in the park to reduce the amount of lawn mowing that's needed.
Thank you. There was a question asked earlier, will there be guardrails on the boardwalk over the marsh? That if you guys could maybe, Glenn, maybe if you could take that one.
Sure. There's 3 different boardwalks crossing over the restored Doan Brook, one on the north branch, one on the south branch, and one where they're combined in the western half of the site. 2 of them on the south branch and the combined Doan Brook, we're not going to require guardrails. We're designing that to not have a fall height hazard for those 2. The one on the north branch is a little bit trickier because we're dealing with some quick transitions to steep grades there to get up the hillside to Shelburne, to that overlook. But our strong desire is to not have guardrails on that. It'll be low enough to the level of the water where they'll not be required. So that's our goal, and I think we'll be able to achieve it as we move into 60% design and refine that design a little bit more.
Thanks, Glenn. So the question was asked, climate change is likely to sustainability heat the park. Will tree density be enough to provide shelter and cool the park?
Well, that's certainly our goal, because ultimately we want to improve the water quality of Doan Brook as much as we can. And one of the best ways that we can do that is to get a canopy over Doan Brook. And there will be a lot of landscape transformation and opportunities for new tree planting. So we're going to try to capitalize that wherever possible, wherever it makes sense with the new landform creations to maximize our tree footprint and ultimately that canopy that helps cool this local environment.
Yeah, I would just add to that. It's in large part, it's a forest restoration project throughout, where we envision the trees, as you saw, starting quite small with pioneer species and transitioning into canopy trees, particularly throughout the floodplain, but even up on the upland areas and in those constructed wetlands as well, really transforming over time. So the vast majority of the site will eventually be forested.
Thanks, Glenn. So this question is from Matt and Stimson, who has identified trees for removal, and what was the criteria for saving/removing those?
I can take a pass at that.
Okay.
A lot, as we've been talking about throughout the show, throughout this presentation, it's really one about hydrology, and stream health really has been driving the design of the restored waterways. And we've been working hand in hand with the hydrologists and the rest of the engineers on our team to make sure the stream as restored is going to be as efficient as possible and restore as much health and provide the most active floodplain that we possibly can. That said, we're also being very cognizant of those communities of invasive trees. And you can see here from this diagram, they're largely in areas that are on the perimeter or through some areas that are currently open in the center and the western half of the site. So we're really directing our stream restoration efforts to go through those areas as much as possible so that the trees that we have to take down for our stream realignment are primarily those invasive species.
Thank you, Glenn. Matt Sharber, if you could take this next question for me, please. Can you talk about where we stand with the legal challenges to the removal of the dam and restoration of Doan Brook, please?
Sure. So there have been a couple of legal challenges to the project. The first was a suit brought against the cities of Shaker Heights and Cleveland Heights to a taxpayer suit, and that was brought to the Cuyahoga County Court of Common Pleas, which was dismissed by the judge in that case. And then that suit was then appealed to the 8th District Court of Appeals and is currently awaiting the panel of judges there for their decision. Then a similar suit was brought against the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District for similar items. And that was also brought to the Cuyahoga County Court of Common Pleas. And that judge has recently ruled and dismissed that case. And so that is where that case currently stands.
Thank you, Matt. So with that, we're going to wrap up. As I mentioned earlier, this is recorded and it should be posted later on this week. If you have any other questions that come up, you can go to Ask Us for any questions that you want to send to us then, or reach out to anyone that you may know throughout the sewer district. But with that, thank you for joining us today, and we appreciate your patience with some of the technology issues. And again, we're going to be out tomorrow from 11 to 1 and 5 to 7 at the Shaker Heights Library. So if you have any questions or want to see things in person, talk to us in person, you can come out then as well. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks very much. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow.